"Is you hungry?" Kanayo almost busted out into laughter, but quickly covered his mouth with his hand and pretended to cough. Another friend, Chinedu, bent his head and began to study the tiles as if he was watching an Indian movie where the actor was dancing in the middle of a gunfight. Obdike wished the ground would open and swallow him whole. Ngozika, thinking she was being a perfect hostess, poked her nose with her finger and put it into her mouth as she clapped her hands loudly and announced, "Are we going to bring in food?" Before Obdike could stop her, she disappeared into the kitchen. His friends tried not to laugh as Obdike hurriedly brought up a conversation to take their minds away from the embarrassment unfolding before his eyes. Once upon a time, in the ever-busy town of Umuahia, lived the man whose name was Obidike. Obidike was not just any man. He was educated, polished, and lived a very good life. Obidike was well educated. In fact, he obtained his master's degree from Harvard and also attended Oxford University for his doctorate. However, despite his exposure, Obidike believed that education was not good for women. In fact, it made them stubborn, confident, and gave them the audacity to challenge men. So, Obidike was of the opinion that education did more harm to women than good. He could not understand why women, created to be homemakers in his eyes, would pursue education instead of focusing on the intricacies of building a good home. All his married friends had chosen well-educated women as their wives, yet only 2 out of his entire circle were still married, and Obidike blamed this squarely on the women's level of education. According to him, education corrupted women, gave them stubbornness, confidence, and the audacity to ask questions. He wanted a wife who would not argue, who would not reason too much, and would not talk about her rights. Above all, Obidike wanted a virgin, a pure woman, untouched by modern nonsense, who would give him children that were uncorrupted by civilization. Anytime his friends advised him to marry a fellow graduate, Obidike would hiss and remind them that the graduates they married were no longer in their home, but frolicking with other men outside. "I want a woman whose brain is still fresh like that of a baby. A woman who won't think much, but obey my every command. A woman who would call me Lord and do whatever I say without questions," he said to his friends, who all laughed at him and called him a dictator. But Obidike did not care. He knew what he wanted and was not willing to settle for anything less. So, he made up his mind to marry an uneducated woman, not because of love, but to ensure that he was always in control. He told himself that an illiterate woman would be more pure, soft, submissive, and would not have the confidence to argue with him. Obidike wanted peace, the kind of peace that comes when one person talks and the other person only listens. So, he traveled to the village like a hunter looking for a rare animal to catch. Obidike spoke to his mother about his quest to marry a woman from the village, an illiterate woman who was not only timid but respectful and calm. He told his mother that he wanted a woman who had not yet been corrupted by modern civilization. His mother was so shocked to hear this, considering the level of education that her son had already attained. She could not understand why he would opt for a timid girl when there were so many beautiful women out there who were not only polished but well spoken. His mother tried to advise him otherwise, but Obidike's mind was already made up. She brought several women to their home, but Obidike always had a problem with them. Either they were too outspoken or half-baked illiterate with a touch of modernization that he was so strongly against. Obidike spent weeks in the village, sifting through women, until he finally met the woman who ticked all his boxes. Her name was Ngozika, and she was the last daughter of the popular palm wine tapper who rarely allowed his daughter out of his house. She was 21 years old, and Obidike could not contain his excitement when he realized that she had never held a mobile phone in her life. In fact, all she did were domestic chores, as her father was too strict to allow his daughter even mingle with other girls in the village. Ngozika had no friends and lacked the basic social skills expected of a girl her age, the type of girl who could stand in front of a mirror and still be shy to greet herself in it. Ngozika was so soft, calm, and always looked like a shy puppy. The moment Obidike first laid his eyes on her, he smiled like someone who had just found his missing wallet. Her eyes were down, and her voice was as calm as breeze. Obdike asked if she could speak English, and Ngozika replied him saying that she couldn't fitted not. "I spoke English smalling," she said to Obdike, who smiled like a clown. His heart danced as he asked for her highest level of education, and Ngozika nodded her head repeatedly like an agama lizard as she could not understand what he was asking. Obdike smiled from ear to ear as he asked her to introduce herself to him. Ngozika cleared her throat as she began to speak to him, saying, "I believe for Amankwo's side, I be Virginia's girl who sabi wash rice, wash plate." Obdike almost clapped when he heard the word Virginia's. That was the kind of word that pleased his foolish ideology. So Obdike rushed the marriage like someone who was afraid that government would suddenly change their policy. He paid her bride price and fulfilled all the marital rites as expected by their tradition, and Ngozika finally became his wife. Obdike carried her back to the city like a trophy. In his mind, he had won a jackpot, not knowing what he had finally invited into his life. Ngozika was so timid, and her mouth was like a ticking time bomb, waiting to explode. Each word that came out of it was like custom made, only tailored for her mouth alone. If she wanted to say "I'm happy," she would say "I'm happinessing." If she wanted to say "I'm coming," she would say "I'm commoting." Obdike tried to correct her on several occasions, but each correction only made things worse, as the next word that escaped from her mouth made the last one look like a joke. One day, his friends decided to pay him a surprise visit. They heard of his new wife and wanted to come see the rare gem that Obdike had been boasting about. Obdike was in the bedroom asleep when they arrived at his house. Ngozika opened the door and found his friends there. "Is you looking to Obdike or you lost?" she asked his friends, who all looked at her confused as they tried to understand the kind of English that she was speaking. Ngozika, seeing how confused they were, spoke up again, this time even slower. "Is you looking to Obdike or you lost?" she asked again as Obdike walked out of the bedroom and met his friends, standing at the door, their eyes and mouths wide open in confusion. "Obdike, see peoples," she said as his friends exchanged glances. One of them coughed, another adjusted his cap as they stepped inside and sat down. Ngozika brought water for them in a big bowl that she got from the toilet, her smile wide as she handed him a rubber cup to scoop from the bowl and drink. Obdike laughed it off, but his embarrassment in that moment crawled into his bones like a worm. He forced a smile as he began to apologize to his friends. "Ah, sorry about that too. She's still adjusting to town life." His friends nodded slowly, but their eyes were already laughing on his behalf. Ngozika, not knowing that she had done something wrong, stood there proudly as she began to blow her nose loudly into her hand. She wiped the kata on her dress as she asked the men if they are hungry. "Is you hungry?" Kanayo almost busted out into laughter, but quickly covered his mouth with his hand and pretended to cough. Another friend, Chinedu, bent his head and began to study the tiles as if he was watching an Indian movie where the actor was dancing in the middle of a gunfight. Obdike wished the ground would open and swallow him whole. Ngozika, thinking she was being a perfect hostess, poked her nose with her finger and put it into her mouth as she clapped her hands loudly and announced, "Are we going to bring in food?" Before Obdike could stop her, she disappeared into the kitchen. His friends tried not to laugh as Obdike hurriedly brought up a conversation to take their minds away from the embarrassment unfolding before his eyes. He began to talk about politics, the economy, floor price, anything that could distract them from the human disaster that he had now married. But before he could finish forming his sentence, a loud angry barking suddenly erupted from his kitchen. Obdike rushed in with his friends and met his wife, holding their neighbor's dog in her hand, about to throw it into some boiling water. Obdike screamed at the top of his voice as his friends all bursted out in laughter, holding their sides like men who were watching a free comedy show. "Ngozika, drop that dog this instant!" he shouted, his Harvard accent disappearing like Nipah. Ngozika froze, confused, the knife still in one hand as his neighbor's dog dangled helplessly in the other. "My husband, we're about to make him pepper soup. Dog meat sweeting past goats." Kanayo collapsed on the kitchen stool, laughing till tears rolled down his cheeks. Chinedu, on the other hand, bent over, slapping his thighs, gasping for air, as he said to Obdike that he did not know that he married a butcher. "This our wife na correct chairman o. She won't kill dog for your house when you yourself cannot even kill a chicken, he said as Kanayo almost collapsed on the floor in laughter. Obdike could not hide his embarrassment. His friends quickly found excuses to leave as they all walked out of his house, laughing and talking about his wife, who stood at the back of the house as she finally released their neighbor's dog. Obdike called her into the house as he exploded in complete rage. Ngozika, what is wrong with you? I know you are not educated, but don't you have sense? Don't you have a brain? He asked his wife Ngozika, who stood there confused. Obdike held his head with both hands as he began to regret why he married such a stupid woman. At this point, the respect that he so craved from a wife did not mean anything to him compared to the shame that was now burning in his chest. He looked at Ngozika again, standing there quietly, her eyes down, hands folded like a child who was now waiting for her punishment. Obdike looked at her, but instead of pity, anger swallowed him whole as he began to yell out angrily, pointing at her as he began to speak out in anger. From today, you will never speak again when my friends are around. Do you hear me? Ngozika nodded quickly, nodding so hard that her neck almost disconnected from her shoulder. And it's not only my friends, he continued, pacing the room. Anywhere we go together, church, market, wedding, burial, even if we are buying pure water, you will not open your mouth. Not one word from you ever again. He said as Ngozika tried to apologize, but Obdike roared at her to shut up. What kind of apology is this? With your English that sounds like something on life support. Do you want to add to my anger? Or you want to finish me completely and send me to my early grave? He said to his wife, who began to cry as he walked away, not caring the damage his words had done. Obdike became a completely different man. Everything his wife did began to irritate him. His heart hardened towards her as her silent obedience began to fill him with disgust. The way she ate, the way she walked, even the way she was breathing began to irritate him. Obdike took her everywhere that he went to showcase how beautiful his wife was. However, Ngozika knew better than to speak. She stood there like a decoration, always nodding as people tried to speak to her. Ngozika followed him everywhere, like a shadow that had learned discipline the hard way. She no longer spoke. She no longer laughed. She nodded, smiled faintly and swallowed every insult like medicine. Despite this, Ngozika treated Obdike with love and respect. She never took anything to heart, as she believed that love meant endurance. She told herself that maybe one day Obdike would soften. Maybe one day he would see her heart and know that her words were not meant to bring him pain. So she tried harder, cooked better meals, ironed his clothes until they were sharp enough to cut out his pride. Ngozika knelt lower, smiled wider, and stayed quieter, knowing that her silence brought peace to their home than her words. But the more she tried, the more Obdike pulled away. One evening, Obdike decided to take her out to a popular restaurant in town, a place filled with soft music, dim lights, and people who spoke English with confidence. He wanted to prove to himself that he could still walk into public with his wife without disgrace. Ngozika sat quietly across from him, hands on her lap, eyes lowered, nodding politely whenever the waiter spoke. Obdike felt relieved. For once there was peace. Then it happened. Ngozika stood up and walked to the nearby table and began to speak to the waiter, saying, "Drink me, pour you. And me see? Me, you putting it inside," she said repeatedly, as her voice cut through the soft music like a bell. The waiter froze as Obdike's heart skipped a beat, not out of fear, but out of pure terror. People at nearby tables turned to look at her. A woman covered her mouth as she began to laugh. Others whispered loudly as Ngozika pointed at the waiter, her words tumbling over as she continued to speak. "Me, putting you inside. My eyes see," she said as laughter erupted in the entire restaurant. People laughed so hard that they almost choked on their food. Obdike felt his face burn. His ears rang. Every laughter sounded like mockery as he ordered Ngozika to sit. However, Ngozika was already shaking, her eyes wide with terror as the entire restaurant erupted in laughter. Obdike stood up so fast as he grabbed her wrist and began to pull her out of the restaurant. "How dare you embarrass me in public?" he said as she tried to explain, but Obdike was too furious to listen. They arrived home a few minutes later and Obdike packed her things and bundled her back to the village. He returned her to her father, requesting that her bride price be returned. Obdike was not having any more embarrassment. His mother tried to make him change his mind, but Obdike was not willing to listen. He returned to Umuahia with his pride bruised but his ego still intact, telling himself that he had done the right thing. According to him, peace had finally returned to his life. No more shame, no more public disasters packaged as a wife. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months as Obdike resumed his old life, hanging out with his friends and attending events alone. He told everyone that cared to listen that marriage to an uneducated woman was the worst thing that can ever happen to a man. Unfortunately for him, his friends continued to tease the life out of him. Every time they met at the bar, Kanayo would clear his throat and ask Obdike how the chairman of Dog Pepper Soup was doing. Chinedu would then laugh and ask him if Ngozika was now happinessing in the village. Laughter exploded around the table as Obdike forced a dry smile as he sipped his drink like a man who was swallowing his regrets with ice. One night, while sitting in Kanayo's house, Obdike turned to the TV and froze. The room that was once filled with laughter went quiet instantly as everyone's eyes glued to the screen. On it was Ngozika, acting alongside top actors that Obdike could only dream of meeting. It was a funny movie and Ngozika was the center of attraction. Her acting was second to none as she didn't have to do much to make people laugh. She was a complete natural and everyone seemed to like her for her unique personality. Her grammatical blunders were the highlight of her movies as her words turned out to be effortlessly funny. Ngozika became a celebrity overnight and Obdike could not wrap his head around it. How did this happen? He asked himself as his bottle almost slipped out of his hand. Ngozika was no longer the timid girl who could not greet her reflection. She was no longer the woman who nodded her life away. She was a star who everyone wanted to feature in their movie. His friends stood there stunned as they stared at the woman who they thought was embarrassing. Obdike could not speak. His legs remained rooted in the ground as he wondered how this was possible. Little did he know that the day he dragged Ngozika out of the restaurant was the day her life changed forever. Ngozika on that fateful day stood up and spoke because she saw the waiter spike a man's drink. At first, she tried to remain calm, but her conscience could not let her sit back and watch harm befall another. So she spoke up, even if her words were not easily understandable. The man whose drink she tried to say was a top movie producer. He had seen through the laughter. He had seen courage, instinct and raw talent. He followed her story quietly, went to her village and gave her a chance, and Ngozika took it without even thinking twice. She learned lines the way she learned survival. Fast, she turned mockery into magic. Her wrong English became her brand. Nigeria fell in love with her as Obdike sat there, surrounded by regret, as he wished he never looked down on her. And for the first time in his life, Obdike understood that life can come at you when you least expect it to. He learned his lessons the hard way, never to look down on anyone in his life. The lessons to be learned from this story is that intelligence is not measured by grammar or certificates, and that humility is far more valuable than pride. Obdike learned too late that silencing, belittling and controlling another human being does not bring peace but regret. Ngozika's story shows that goodness of heart, courage and authenticity can open doors education alone cannot, and that what one person mocks may be the very gift the world celebrates. Above all, the lesson is clear. Never look down on anyone, never mistake silence for stupidity, and never judge a person's worth by how they speak, because life has a way of lifting the very people you try to bury. I hope you enjoyed